Now, for years, I have been begging Fujifilm to release a fast 70mm prime lens, or 105mm equivalent on full frame, probably since the days I started shooting with the X-T1, and Fujifilm has not made my dreams real, but Samyang has. And I have featured Samyang lenses on the channel already, and I went as far as saying that the 12mm f2 was the best third-party lens for the Fujifilm system, but Samyang may have just kicked that out of the park with the new 75mm F1.8 autofocus prime for the Fujifilm X mount. Now, quick important disclaimer first. Since I last posted a video about a Samyang lens, I have become a brand ambassador for Holden, which is the distributor of Oya, Atomos and Samyang among others here in the UK. But this video is not sponsored. I do not get paid for this review, and neither Holden nor Samyang have any say in what I show here. And I've also not watched this video before it was published. As per my usual, my reviews are entirely my own honest opinion, and I'm very proud to keep it this way, because I take my reviews very seriously, and I want you to be confident that you can always trust me. But as a brand ambassador, I was given the opportunity to test this lens ahead of its public launch, which just happened a few hours ago. And this here is a pre-production unit, but nevertheless, I am very impressed with it. And I accepted to be brand ambassador because I love Samyang lenses. And in fact, the 12mm manual focus was the very first lens I purchased aside of the kit lens, back when I started with the X-T1. And Samyang were the first to invest in developing for the Fujifilm system, even when Fujifilm was not too keen to open to third-party manufacturers. So they have a lot of experience developing for this system. And on top of that, among the many Asian manufacturers, you can always trust the Koreans to make some of the best tech around. Now, Samyang, they also recently changed the design of their lenses, making them as sexy as the official Fujifilm lenses. They're very well built, solid and beautiful, all while keeping the price tag very affordable. Actually, let's play a little game here. Pause the video now and write in the comments below how much would you pay for a fast prime portrait lens like this 75mm f1.8. And consider that the Fujifilm 80mm f2.8 is over £1,000 and the 90mm f2 is just slightly less. Pause here and let me know. And well, the Samyang 75mm f1.8 will retail at £395, which is unbelievably good for such a fast prime lens and almost a third of the Fujifilm 80mm. And I can't compare this to Fujifilm equivalent of 75 or even 70mm because, as you know, if you followed me for some time and despite my constant nagging about it, Fujifilm still doesn't have a 70mm prime. And I don't know when 105mm equivalent went out of fashion, but it's a fantastic focal length for portraits. And a long time ago, I started shooting fashion with one of the best lenses ever built, but I would not be able to use it today because on a crop sensor it would go up to 162mm. And 105 is not only good for portraits, it's also still flexible enough to be used in a variety of other situations. For example, as a travel lens, you get good background compression, but still not so much that you lose entirely the 3D feel of the environment. You can still understand layers and distances, but everyone today seems to favor the 135mm focal length, and Fujifilm makes a fantastic 90mm lens, but still no 70. And this too, it's still not 70mm, but it's the closest we get. And as I'm going to show you now, at the price of this lens, the performance and image quality are incredible. So let's get into it. Now, in terms of specs, this lens is less than 70mm long and weighs only 257 grams. Now, it's actually so light that when I received the parcel, I thought they made a mistake and sent me an empty box. But this doesn't mean that it feels cheap, none at all. It's actually pretty solid, but it means that you can carry it and hold it for long shooting sessions without feeling tired. And it's also weather sealed, which is always one of the key features for us living in the UK, and protects the lens from the rain, the dust, etc. Now, as you can see, this lens doesn't have an aperture ring, something that used to be a staple for any lens for the Fujifilm system. But recently, even Fujifilm started to drop this feature. And in fact, the first time I tried a lens without the aperture ring was the new kit lens for the Fuji GFX medium format system. And back then, shooting street photography, I felt that the lack of aperture ring slowed me down considerably because my muscle memory was still built around using the aperture ring. And every time that the light changed, I had to think about going back to the dial on the handle and check if I was turning the right way to get the aperture I wanted, and also verify that I had not changed the ISO instead, because that's how the GFX 50S Mark II is built. But having used lenses without aperturing more often now, I don't particularly mind its absence, and probably even less in a much more specialistic kind of lens like this one, because the 75mm is more geared towards portrait and fashion, and normally you work with a much more controlled environment in these genres, and you keep your aperture consistently open for a more shallow depth of field. You don't really change it all the time. And there is actually a slight advantage in not having the aperture ring, and this is evident in cameras that have the photo-video switch, because being the aperture controlled electronically, you can have separate settings between photo and video that are retained when you switch. You don't have to readjust the aperture every time. Now, on the other hand, if you shoot time-lapse, for example, and you would like to change the settings manually on the fly based on the light or anything, then having the electronic aperture means you are stuck with a fixed aperture for the whole shooting, unless you shoot in auto aperture mode. But honestly, with this lens, I am totally fine without an aperture ring. But the focus ring is very smooth, but as a sort of nice resistance to it, which is perfect for better precision when you want to use manual focus, or if you want to refine the autofocus. And I'll get back to the autofocus later. Now, the filter thread is 62mm, which is the same as the 12mm autofocus and consistent with the Fujifilm lenses around this focal length. The 56, the 80, the 90mm lenses for Fujifilm, and also I think the 55 to 100mm zoom, they all have a diameter of 62mm. Now, something else that you may notice on the side of the lens is this M1, M2 switch. And what does it do? Well, in theory, you should be able to assign and lock two separate focus distances to quickly get back to it. Or at least this is how I understood it, which is something that is rare to find on lenses and certainly unique on a lens at this price point. But on this pre-production unit, this switch is not working. It will at launch, and Samyang say that additional functions will be made available with firmware updates, but I can't show it to you right now. So now let's move to the inside of the lens. And here are the details of the construction, with the 10 elements in 9 groups shown here in this graphic. There are 2 high refractive lenses and 3 extra low dispersion ones. And this combination minimizes color aberration and achieves exceptional image quality with high contrast even when the aperture is fully opened. And the UMC coating technology optimizes the light penetration to also minimize flare and ghost. What Samyang is doing here is taking the full frame lens construction of the equivalent lens they sell for Sony and using it on the APS-C format. And this seems to work because the images are exceptionally good. They are. So let's look at them, shall we? Now, as I mentioned, a 75mm is commonly considered a portrait lens. So the first thing I did was asking my model Ali to pose for me in central London. And by the way, go give him a follow. I really enjoyed shooting with him, so give him a follow. And like I said earlier, you are likely to shoot wide open with fashion portrait for background separation. So this is what I did here. And you can immediately see how sharp is this Samyang 75mm at a wide aperture. And it's amazing, really amazing, and very much in line with what Samyang already produced with my beloved 12mm lens. And even when you look at the edge of the frame here, it still remains very sharp and detailed. So I also tested this on a pattern on a wall near Regent Street, and see the sharpness here at the center, and at the edges, and at the corners. But I also tested this on a more professional focus board, and again, same results. Here in the center, here at the edges, and here at the corners. And also at different apertures, like f2.8, f4, and down to f11. Now, the background and the bokeh, again, very good results. The isolation from the background is great, as expected, but the effect is not always buttery smooth, and particularly with busy backgrounds. But most of the times, and with the straight lights at night, you actually get very pleasing results. And the shape of those lights is a matter of taste, but personally, I am very much pleased with how they look. And what I also particularly like is the shape of the starburst effect, something that you can already achieve with this lens at f9 or f11, so there is no need to close the aperture so much that you start introducing diffraction and loose detail. Now, if we zoom in a little bit to see the level of detail that these 75mm can achieve, I think it's all even more impressive. And remember how this lens is priced. And now, look at something as trivial as this phone boot handle. You can perfectly see all the scratches on the metal. And this was shot on the 26MP sensor of the X-T4. Imagine what it could look like on the 40MP of the X-T5 or X-H2. And also look at the details on the feathers of this pelican, or the details on the hair of this dog. And this face and the smoke here, it all look just perfect to me. And when I showed you the design of the internal build, I mentioned the lens flare. And yes, there is lens flare at times, but it's actually so pleasing that it could very well become a feature. It could very well be a frame for our subject. I have seen other lenses produce horrible lens flares, either too bright or with strange shapes, particularly with some Chinese lenses for some reason. But lens flare can also give some character to the image, and I find this to be the case with the 75mm. Now, you may remember from my review of the 12mm autofocus version that the lens was slow to switch on and forced us to wait 2 seconds to be able to shoot. But Samyang fixed it with a firmware update, and now on this 70mm as well, you can operate as fast as with a Fujifilm lens. And the autofocus is fast and snappy as well, with a very silent linear motor. Maybe slightly less performing in low light, but when I noticed the struggle, I was also shooting against a very busy background with lots of lights and distractions, so the lens was hunting for focus a little more than I would have liked. But again, this lens here is a pre-production unit, and I'm sure everything has improved in the retail versions. But anyway, you can see here in this very basic test how the autofocus works and how smooth it transitions between focal planes. And the accuracy is also good as it snaps onto the eyes quickly. Now, personally, I am more a manual focus or back button focus kind of guy, so I don't rely on autofocus too much, but I found it to be very good when I tested it. And the minimum focusing distance on this lens is 69cm or 2.26 or 27 feet, which is totally fine for portraits, but maybe you would like to get closer in other situations. But I still think that 69cm is absolutely acceptable on a 105mm equivalent lens. Now, at the widest aperture of f1.8, there is very subtle vignette and a minimal distortion. And you can see here when I switch between no profile and lens profile in Lightroom how the image changes. But I think that the differences are negligible. The image would be perfectly usable even without the profile correction. And I'm not even sure it actually requires a correction. And since I shot this before the lens was publicly available, my guess is that this is Adobe trying to be clever and applying the Sony version profile. But anyway, I need to show it to you for completeness of information. And the chromatic aberration as well is non-existent, no fringing of any sort. So again, phenomenal results. And now, on the video side of things, I must admit I didn't have much time with the lens to test the video capabilities as well. But with lenses of 50mm and above, I think we enter a realm of needing stabilization helpers, because handheld I would probably shake too much and it would all be jittery. And I don't go out with gimbals, and this lens doesn't come with optical image stabilization, so I did not test the video much while shooting with this lens. But I will probably do it when I will compare these with other lenses like the Fujifilm 80mm and 90mm, just not in this video. But then again, even if this lens may end up falling short on video, and I don't know if it will yet, remember the price. My favorite lens I just mentioned, the 90mm, comes at more than twice the price of this 75mm. And I know I'm still banging about the price, which can be the main talking point for this lens. I find it mind-blowing because the output is so good, I still can't believe it. I think that Samyang did an incredible job with these 75mm, and I am very happy to be able to finally shoot more at 105mm equivalent. And yes, the lens doesn't have an aperture ring, but it doesn't slow me down. And it's a very well-built lens for the Fujifilm system, and still one of the few third-party lenses with full autofocus support. And considering how flattering it is with portraits, which is the common use case scenario for this focal lens, how sharp and detailed are the photos, and again, the price point and the custom switches, I think this goes very high, very high in my list of lenses for Fujifilm. So I'd say it is a must-have, and I can surely recommend this. And this focal length is not only for portraits, it's very usable for travel and cityscapes as well, where the compression of the telephoto makes for interesting clusters of buildings, but also for street photography. Maybe more focused on people and less on the scene because of how close you can get with this lens. And so, thank you very much, Samyang, and thank you for watching this till here. I hope I gave you a good and honest overview of this new lens that just came out. And if you enjoyed it, please leave a like and maybe subscribe to keep watching the next videos as soon as I release them. And more videos with this Samyang 75mm will come. Also, let me know your thoughts in the comments. I always reply to everyone. And if you want to know more about other Samyang lenses for the Fujifilm system, you can check these other videos here. So, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.